Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be listening to true, scary renting horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. This isn't my story, but my dad's. Around 40 years ago, when my dad was still in college, he moved quite a ways from Hai Chi Minh City in Vietnam to New Haven, Connecticut for college. He wanted to be as near as possible to his college, but also wanted to overlook the city skyline. He had already received the Form I-20 and went to the consular at the U.S. Embassy to try to get an M student visa. He was a first-generation immigrant, and though he had taken a fair amount of English classes in Vietnam, he wasn't fluent and knew nothing about housing in America. This is why he went the cheap route and rented out a podunk. Don't know if that's the right word to use, but I mean it was really shady-looking apartment somewhere near Pine Tree Drive in West Haven. His landlord, as he told me later, gave off some serious red flags that he sort of brushed off because the apartment was only $250 a month. Firstly, the landlord's abode was directly next door to that of my dad's, and during his first night there, while he was getting unpacked, he heard a high-pitched screeching and weird opera music. Again, he brushed it off, for the same reason as said above, and also because he was very tired. The next morning when he woke up, he noticed a chair by his bed that wasn't there before, and when he went to the bathroom, his toilet seat was up, though he recalled putting it down. Not only that, but his door was unlocked. He again just brushed it off because he didn't want to stir up anything with his landlord by asking if he had come into his room, or by asking if it had been broken into, therein referring that the apartment was insecure. He also wanted to explore West Haven, as his college year did not begin until late August. He had come 3 weeks early. As he left, he specifically remembered locking his door behind him, but when he returned after a few hours out, he noticed that not only had the door been unlocked, but it was slightly ajar. This went on for weeks until his college year began. Things slightly moved from where he had left them, articles of food missing from his fridge, and other weird happenings. Finally, my dad had had enough. One night, he decided to stay awake until very late and try to catch whoever was doing this red-handed. That night, he finished his homework and then got into bed, but he remained awake. And sure enough, around 2 a.m, he sees his door handle turning and a hand sliding through. My dad froze. His blood ran cold. He then saw the landlord creep in and take some eggs from the fridge. Not only that, but the landlord then went to the bathroom, coming out a couple of minutes afterwards. He then slipped out once again, leaving the door unlocked. This creeped my dad out like heck, which is understandable, but for some reason he still decided to stay at that apartment for a few more nights before he finally confronted the landlord. This was because of money and wanting to save it, and that does some stupid things to the brain, I guess. This was before mobile phones, and even before decent cameras that didn't cost over $100. So my dad had literally no way to get evidence to show the cops besides mere accusations. The next night, he once more heard odd screeching and weird opera music coming from his landlord's room, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. That weekend, when his landlord went out shopping, he broke into his landlord's room, and what he found there was seriously disturbing. First of all, he found some weird adult doll, but when he investigated further, he found an old Kodak camera. Under this was some extremely low-quality pictures of him in bed, sleeping. He noped the heck out of there, taking the pictures with him, and went to the police station. He moved out of there shortly after, and he later heard that this same landlord had scared other residents of the apartment off after hearing the odd screeching and opera music, and after seeing all of their things moved around. The building my dad lived in was since torn down, and my dad decided to just dorm at Sigma Chi. He had at first opted to stay away from fraternities because of the heavy partying. We never knew what happened to the landlord, only that he would be facing some prison time. I seriously hope that he was never allowed to be a landlord again. My boyfriend and I applied to and moved into an apartment a few months back. I originally viewed it with my dad, who checked it out before I had. My boyfriend never viewed it, just trusted my judgment. I didn't mention my boyfriend to my landlord when we looked because it didn't cross my mind, and I figured that my dad probably noted it already. After we applied as a couple, my landlord stopped into my work and questioned why I hadn't mentioned my significant other. He was just questioning it, but didn't reject our application. That seemed to be crossing a line, as he would have only learned my work address from my application, and he could have just called. I brushed it off, thinking it may be a generational thing. He's like 80 years old. Months into my lease, my significant other had a family tragedy and needed to move back in with his mom. I started packing the apartment so that I could help advertise it to be rented to someone else. The landlord offered me half the rent for 6 months to help with the situation, mentioning that it would be helping us both out while he was away during the winter. He lives below us as we have the attic space, and no one would be there to watch the house if we couldn't find a new tenant. I met with him to go over the new lease agreement. He noted it was important that I didn't retreat the new agreement, and I would stay for the duration of the lease. The weird part of this was him being extra interested in the small possibility that I may separate from my significant other and be at the apartment by myself. He also ended up asking about my political views. It came up relatively naturally throughout some small talk, although he shouldn't have asked in my opinion. I was more than happy to be honest, thinking that he probably aligned with me. We ended up being on opposite sides, and that created some tension while he tried to express his frustration on matters that we'd obviously disagree. I backed away carefully out of the debate that he was trying to create because I felt that it was important to maintain a respectful relationship. Despite the uncomfortable conversation, the deal seemed too good to pass up, so I accepted the offer and signed. Since then, he has on multiple occasions came into the apartment for random, unimportant reasons without notifying me in advance. He's left messages asking me to attend a local event, mainly circulated on political issues with him. He's run out of his side door in his robe while I'm trying to leave to ask me menial questions, as if he's always listening for me to be home. He comes into my work to drop off the flyers for the traveling speaker I mentioned, where he also sits and stares at me. I work in a coffee shop. And just today, I noticed that he installed a motion detecting chime that notifies him when I'm on the landing leading to my door. The chime is quiet enough for me to know that it's coming from inside the house on his floor. The last time he came into my work, I all but had a panic attack and started sobbing in front of all of my coworkers. It seems reasonable for me to be upset, despite what he might think is acceptable contact. It feels like he's holding this lease term over my head, in a way. I was around 12 when this happened. It was a Saturday morning, and my parents were going out of town for the weekend. They left my older brother to babysit, but as soon as they left, he did too. Great brother, I know. So I'm sitting in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rings. Instead of looking through the peephole like a normal person, I fling the door, eager for company. I thought that it would be my neighbor, not two middle-aged men looking down at me. Are your parents home? I didn't even hesitate when I tell them no. They're actually out of town for the weekend. Man, if I could go back in time, I would go back and slap myself silly. They exchange glances, and the older man looking says, "Well, I'm your landlord, and we need to come inside to check a few things out." That's when I realize how much trouble I'm in. I know my landlord. He's a friend of the family, and he's not either of the men standing in front of me. Thank God for quick thinking, because I tell him, "Yes, but I need to grab something first." And before they could reply, I shut the door and deadbolt it. I run to the kitchen, grab the phone, and dial my mom's number. I remember thinking, "Please pick up, please pick up, please pick up." She does, and the second I hear her voice, I break down sobbing. There's two guys at the front door, and they want to come in. One said he's the landlord, but it's not Mario, and I'm scared. "Come home now." Then I hear pounding on the window. My mom hears it too, because the next thing she tells me is, "Dad is on the phone with the police, and I need you to tell them that. Shout it at the top of your lungs that the cops are on their way. They know you're home alone, and they need to know that you won't be for long. I'll be there in 20 minutes. My parents are an hour away, and how they made it home as fast as they did, I'll never know. But through my tears, I yell as loud as I can, 'The cops are on their way.' Hey, we weren't going to hurt you. No need to cry. It's okay, we'll leave." Then silence. It seemed like a lifetime, but was no less than 10 minutes when the police arrived. I will always remember the female officer who spoke with me. She calmed me down and applauded my quick thinking on shutting the door. She told me to never open the front door again unless it was someone that I knew, and even then not to do it if I was home alone, which I wasn't for a very long time after that. My parents pulled into the driveway like a bat out of heck, and my mom hugged me tighter than she ever had before. I was crying. She was crying. I got a lecture on opening the door for strangers and how lucky I was to be alive, and my brother got yelled at and grounded. Not that he cared much, he moved out shortly thereafter. The cops took a report and surveilled the area for 2 men but never found them. I learned my lesson that day. I have no idea who they were or what their intentions were, and I don't care to ever find out. So my boyfriend rents a master bedroom in a couple's house. It's a pretty nice space. Big, roomy, private bathroom, fairly tidy house, and he's allowed to use the kitchen anytime. His landlord is the only downside. He tends to yell at his wife, drinks too much, and falls asleep on the couch most nights after drinking and watching sports. I've barely ever seen the landlord or spoken to him. Usually when I come by after work, he's already passed out on the couch. This weekend I was at my boyfriend's, and we were making lunch in the kitchen. Landlord comes around the corner and gives me a very long, creepy stare. I look back and say hi just to be friendly. Landlord keeps staring and then says, "If you're gonna be in the house, you could at least say hi." My boyfriend stops what he's doing and says, "She did just say hi, I heard her." The landlord scowls and shuffles off. An hour later, landlord sends my boyfriend a message. He says I'm not allowed to come over anymore because I give off an unfriendly vibe. The dog doesn't like me, and they don't feel comfortable with me there. For the record, the dog has bitten the landlord several times and has no problem with me. Anyway, the upshot is that we'll be hanging out at my place for a while instead. And yes, my boyfriend is looking to move out stat. Thankfully, he's on month-to-month rent there. Once upon a time, back when I was about 20, a friend of mine got into some trouble and went to jail. He needed someone to go and stay at his place and take care of his elderly dog and keep his bird fed. I immediately accepted, as I really didn't want to live with my mom and her new, younger boyfriend. Now, here is where I should probably mention that my friend was into some not-so-great things. That's how he ended up in jail. So naturally, that meant that some pretty shady characters were going around up there. Those characters usually waited until after I went to bed to start coming around and helping themselves to whatever they desired. That was bad enough on its own. But since my friend couldn't pay his electrical bill from jail, there was also no lights. Since the bedroom I was staying in had a deadbolt and another lock, I felt okay in there. I of course realize now how stupid and naive I was back then. After all, I'm only 5'3", and back then, I only weighed about 100 pounds. I guess my desperation for independence drove me to brave it. I would literally wake up the next day to find footprints outside the living room window, and I even found the phone line cut outside once. While all that was going on, my friend's creepy, teeth-missing, pervy landlord started randomly showing up. The landlord only lived like 3 football fields away. Apparently, my friend couldn't pay rent from jail either. He also didn't want me to tell his landlord that he was in jail, so I had to keep giving some stupid excuse about him being away at families. But that excuse only went so far, and probably knowing full well that it was crap, the landlord started showing up even more. And when he did, he started saying nasty things like, "My wife and I would be pretty excited to have you over, especially in a bikini." Soon enough, though, the landlord started being angrier and more frustrated each and every time he would show up. He would just show up at any given time, and since I didn't drive at the time, I was usually there for these unfortunate visits. Eventually, he just started straight up walking in, not even bothering to knock anymore. I told him that that was illegal, but he didn't seem to care at all. Remember earlier in the story, I mentioned that I slept in a locked room? Well, unfortunately, on that particular morning, I had already gotten up and made a trip to the kitchen for some water after the sun had already come up. Because of the daylight, I didn't even bother locking the bedroom door again. I just closed it. Not long after I had fallen back to sleep, a strange, slight noise woke me up. It was sort of a soft clicking sound. I gradually opened my eyes, but I didn't see anything, so I tried to go back to sleep. But then, I was suddenly startled back awake, as I could just feel another presence in the room with me. As I slowly focused my eyes in the light, I saw the old landlord standing over me and mouth breathing with a creepy grin on his sinister face. I instantly bolted upright, whilst grabbing the bed sheet and pulling it over my body. And then I went from 0 to 60 in less than 1 second. I jumped up out of the bed and yelled, "What the heck do you think you're doing right now?" All the while, I continued walking towards him angrily. He backed right up and practically ran out the front door. I locked it behind him screaming, "I'm calling the cops." The cops came out, but since I had no proof and he didn't hurt me, they really couldn't do much. To this day, though, I'll never forget the sound of the old landlord's mouth breathing as he leaned over my sleeping, unsuspecting body. This happened to me last year when I was looking to move house. For the record, I'm a single female. I had been looking on a room renting website and found a couple of places that fit my requirements. One being a multiple occupancy student type shared house. Not ideal, but cheap. And one being a 2-bed house with 1 other occupant. Much more expensive, but nicer living conditions for me. These 2 properties also happened to be directly next door to each other on the same street. So I arranged to see both one evening after work. Shared house first, 2-bed, place immediately after. I had messaged the landlord of both places to set up a time, and the first guy seemed perfectly normal. And in fact, he was the whole time that he was showing me around the place. He was a skinny, middle-aged, slightly balding, and unremarkable guy who worked in IT in another city. Quite chatty about his personal life, obviously telling me what he did for a living, asking me questions about my hobbies, etc. Nothing too out of the ordinary. The only thing that seemed off was when I first arrived and knocked on the door, I was greeted by one of the tenants, who told me the landlord was upstairs so I should just go up. I did so, and followed the sound of voices to one of the rooms where the door was open. As I approached, I saw a man and a woman stood together on one side of the bed, and this guy on the other side. They all turned to look towards me as I walked towards the door, and it was a bit awkward as it seemed like I'd interrupted their conversation. But I guess they took it as an opportunity to wrap up as the couple said their thanks and left. The other guy introduced himself as the landlord, and I apologized for arriving early / butting in, but that the tenant had told me to come straight up. He said no problem, and that he didn't mind since he didn't want to rent to couples anyway. Fair enough. As we were roaming the house and chatting, he introduced me to the other tenants who were hanging out in the kitchen cooking, and he asked me what my interests were and if we all had anything in common. I told them that I was into the arts, movies, comic books, and a bit of a nerd, and he asked me if I watched The Big Bang Theory. I said sometimes, and made a joke that I actually tell most people the main characters are what my general friend group is like. He looked me up and down and said, "Yeah, you do kind of remind me of a weird hybrid of Penny and Leonard," then smiled a slow little smile. I was like, that's a weird comment, but okay. I guess I have a similar facial structure to Kaylee Cuoco, the short pixie hair like hers in the later seasons. But I was also dressed in baggy jeans, sneakers, and a boxy khaki military jacket with no makeup on, so I could kind of see what he was aiming at. As I was wrapping up to leave, he was asking me if I had any other questions for him, so I took the opportunity to clarify the deposit and rent amount again. He confirmed this with me, and then smiled again and said, "You seem like a really cool person, so I'm sure that we could work out something cheaper. I just advertised that price to filter up people off, but I trust you." I thanked him for the offer, but that I still had other places to see, so I would let him know. The place next door turned out to be perfect, and I decided almost immediately that it was worth paying more for the privacy and space up there, as I've lived in so many multiple shares before and was getting tired of all the problems that came with it. After a couple more days and confirming with the landlady of the 2-bedroom, I agreed to sign the contract and move in at the beginning of the next month. I sent out a generic message to the previous few people I'd seen, thanking them for their interest, but that I'd decided on another property. And I only got one unexpected response from the landlord I'd seen before saying, "Sorry to hear that. You seemed really cool. I'd love to meet up for a drink sometime." As soon as I read that, I was pretty much like, no, and just never even bothered responding. Deleted his number from my phone and forgot all about it. Fast forward about a week later, and I was with a couple of friends in the pub. As we were catching up, I mentioned the house that I'd gone to see and the random message that the landlord had sent me. One of my friends, who is really immature, a typical prankster, was desperate to see the actual messages that he had sent me. I guess, for proof and for laughs, I guess. Well, I deleted his contact, but not the message history. So I found it and pulled it up for them to look at. They had their, "Ooh, that's creepy" laugh over it. Ribbed me out about maybe he's in the pub right now crying because I rejected him. Haha, very funny. I got up to go to the toilet, and when I came back, I saw that the two of them hunched over something, giggling, and when they saw me walk over, they went silent. That was when I realized that I'd walked away and left these two clowns with my unlocked phone. You can probably guess where this is going. The prankster of the two decided that it would be hilarious to reply to the guy's message, and he took the bait. Within the 4 or 5 minutes I had been away, he had started a flirtatious dialogue posing as me. Yes, this guy is a massive idiot. I tried to get my phone back, but we all had been drinking, and they convinced me it would be fine. They were just having a bit of fun. I wasn't happy about it, but they wouldn't let me see what they were typing, so I didn't know how bad it could be. After several more minutes of immature giggling and typing back and forth, my friend's faces suddenly dropped. He put his hand over his eyes and threw the phone down at the table in disgust. I caught the image of this man filling my phone screen before snatching it up, closing the chat and deleting it. I asked the guys what on earth they had said to make it escalate so quickly, and they apparently made out that I was a transgender woman with a neck fetish of all things, and this guy was really into it, prompting him to send those kind of pictures. I suddenly got another message notification, and the guy had added me as a contact on WhatsApp and started sending me messages like, "You make me so excited. I want to see what your mouth can do. And I'd love to bite your neck if you'll bite mine," along with more pictures of his outstretched neck. I blocked him before it escalated any further. The other guys found this hilarious. I was not nearly so amused because I had just agreed to move next door to the house that this guy owned, and I did berate them massively for their stupidity. I almost ended my friendship with the idiotic prankster because of it, on top of other things. He's taken my phone before and sent inappropriate messages to group chats that could easily have been my work or family. I'm all up for a joke, but this just went too far and made me very angry. Always keep your phone locked. I haven't heard from the guy since, although, funnily enough, when I first moved into the house and was chatting with the landlady, I mentioned the fact that I'd viewed the house next door, and she said without provocation, "Yeah, I know the guy who owns it. He's super creepy." I always got a weird vibe from him. I just sort of laughed in agreement. Needless to say, I am 1000% glad that I chose not to move in there. A couple of weeks ago, someone had dropped groceries at my door with 2 coffees. The groceries were very odd. Lubricant, lollipops, not your normal grocery shop. I thought it was delivered to the wrong apartment, and as there was no receipt on confirmation in the bag, I left it in the lobby, but no one claimed it. A week later, a letter was slipped under my door with $200 in it. The letter was by a man talking about his recent hardship and how he'd like to talk to me and hear my voice. Again, I was a little naive, so I took the note to my building manager, thinking it was for someone else. He thought it was strange, so called the number on the letter, and it turns out it was a man in the building next door saying he wanted to be my friend. The buildings are really close together, and you can see into the apartments if the blinds are open. My building manager told him to leave me alone and to stay out of the building. I thought it was over, but today I heard someone pacing in the hallway outside my apartment for a couple of minutes. I went to leave an hour later, and there was a coin in front of my door, dead center, like it had been placed there. The only way it would get there is if it was placed, or if my neighbor had dropped it, as my neighbor should be the only other person that walks past my door. But based on where I found it, it makes me feel like it was deliberately placed. I wouldn't think twice about the coin, but with what's been happening, it's making me really anxious. 2 days later after the coin incident, I left my apartment, and a man in his 60s or 70s approached me straight away, telling me that he's selling his car and if I wanted to take a look at it. So I have a number plate, and I'm reporting it to the police. For background, I'm a 24-year-old female, and I live with my roommate, a 23-year-old female, in an apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. As you may know, Atlanta is super dangerous and crime-ridden right now, so we have a Ring peephole camera, perfect for apartments, and a digital lock on our door for safety. Now onto the story. About 3 months ago, the sweet family from across the hall moved out, and we got a new neighbor. His name is David, and let's just say he's interesting. When we first saw him moving in, we were a bit taken aback by the sheer amount of stuff that he was trying to fit into his one-bedroom apartment. All of it was anime merch and Star Wars memorabilia. Definitely gives me hoarder vibes, but not my business. When the moving trucks left and a few days had passed, my roommate and I knocked on his door to give him a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket with some baked goods, dog treats, and poop bags for his dog, and seasonal candles. Apparently, this was not the correct thing to do. After that day, David got very creepy. It started out innocent enough. He would come to the door whenever he heard me or my roommate coming or going to give a quick chat. Or he would come over regularly to ask for salt or sugar or toilet paper. Sometimes he would ask if we could come over and watch his dog. But within the past 2 weeks, things have really escalated. 2 weekends ago, we were out pretty late partying at the bars near the Braves Stadium. We ended up going home around 3 a.m., only to find David at the top of the stairs waiting for us. He acted all upset, asked us where we had been, and requested that we tell him if we're planning to be out past midnight. I laughed in his face, and he called me a mindless Stacy, still not sure what that means. He also asked for access to our Ring camera so that he could make sure that we were safe. We laughed at him again and went into our apartment. Here's the scary part. We checked our Ring the next morning, and he sat outside his apartment staring at our door for the rest of the night. When we saw that, we contacted the complex to let them know that he was acting crazy. They told us to contact the police, so we did. The police told us to contact them if he made any threats, but since we lived in a shared space, they couldn't do anything until he entered our apartment or threatened us. I assume the complex said something to him because he left us alone for the next 5 days or so. This week, he's out of control. He is constantly sitting outside of our apartment. My roommate has started leaving for work an hour earlier so that she doesn't cross paths with him. I cannot leave the apartment during the day because he is constantly waiting outside for me. He's asked me out, left love letters on our door, on our cars, and in our mailbox. I told him once that I wasn't interested, and he told me that he would unalive himself if I didn't go on a date with him. Of course, I don't have that in writing, so the police didn't do anything. He has also put up a Ring doorbell of his own so that he can track all of our movements, and will leave really creepy notes when we're gone, so we find them when we come back. What do we do? Edit. For now, my brother is spending the night on my couch for the next few nights, until we can have a sit-down meeting with my landlord. We've collected all of the evidence and Ring footage so that we can show how much this has progressed. I'm sure the landlord and the police think we're being dramatic little girls or whatever, so we're not going to take no for an answer. Either he leaves, or we break our lease and get our full security deposit back. We're also going to file for a temporary restraining order at the very minimum, because some of the commenters said that would be faster than going through the police. Again, thank you all so much for all of the advice. I'll update if anything crazy goes down. Edit. Thank you so much to everyone who replied in this thread and sent me direct messages. I really appreciate all of the kind words, advice, and support. Here are some updates. 1. We met with our landlord last week. Unfortunately, they aren't willing to work with us as much as we expected. They will not remove him from his unit. Since we didn't want to spend a ton of money to move, we asked if we could move units within the complex. The landlord offered us a 1-bedroom unit on the terrace level, so my roommate and I would have to share a room in what is basically the basement of our building. Not ideal. 2. We spoke to the police. They said that the notes and letters weren't enough to get someone on stalking or harassment, especially since he lives literally 3 feet away from us. He probably just thinks that you're cute, they said. They did keep the Ring videos and said that they would contact us sometime this week after they reviewed all the footage. 3. We've moved in with my parents for the time being. Shout out to them for being incredible parents. It really sucks spending $2,000 plus monthly on a place that you can't live. We're actively looking for other apartments, but money is tight since we would have to buy out the current lease and pay to start a new one. Also not ideal. So, not the update we were hoping for. But we're both safe now, and that's what's important. If anyone has any suggestions about raising $5,000 in a month, please let me know. When I, a 38-year-old female, was 18, I lived in a detached garage apartment that had a second apartment upstairs. My apartment was an efficiency, and only had walls without doors to separate the rooms. The second floor was being renovated and no one rented it. At night, I would hear footsteps, and it sounded like it came from upstairs. I could hear someone going up and down the stairs outside at night. One time, I had put my St. Bernard on a tie out to party, and I went outside, and I heard scratching on the steps to find her wrapped around the stairs in a way that she couldn't have done by herself. I started having friends stay over because I thought that I was imagining things, since it was my first time living alone. One night, I was laying in bed and I heard a noise that woke me up. I looked up half awake and saw a shadowy figure at the foot of my bed. I could see the outline of what looked like a thin man or woman with shaggy hair and a top hat. I told myself I was just being paranoid and imagining things. I grabbed a hold of my dog and covered us with a blanket, telling myself it wasn't real. A few weeks later, my car had a baseball thrown through the window. I was out taping up my window, and my neighbor came out to talk to me. A young couple rented the house on the same lot. I asked her if she knew if our landlord had either been working on the upstairs unit or maybe rented it out because I kept hearing noises. She told me no, and offered to have her husband go take a look upstairs in the unit. While he was inspecting, she started telling me to be aware of a homeless man who was seen in the alley behind us. I asked her to describe him, and she tells me that he's thin, tall, dirty long hair, and always wearing a funny hat, kind of like the Mad Hatter. Her husband comes back and tells me that the door was unlocked, but the floor isn't done in the upstairs apartment, and there's no possible way someone could be up there because there was no place to step. I called my mom and she helped me move. While I was loading the U-Haul, I found 3 house keys in random places in my yard. All of them went to my door. I'm pretty sure that this dude was just living with me, and I had no idea. When I was around 7 years old, my parents rented out our basement to a young couple, a man and a woman. Things went smoothly for the first couple of months for the most part, save for the occasional loud party here or there. They were nice enough and would even leave their door open, which was under our backyard porch, for my siblings and I, the youngest being 5 and the oldest 9 years old, to wander in and out and use their basketballs, badminton racks, etc. whenever they were home. They would let us come and go as we pleased, although we didn't do so very often, because my parents weren't very comfortable with the idea, of course. As time went on, they started getting a bit out of hand, throwing loud parties until all hours of the night and disturbing the neighbors, sketchy people coming in and out, and my parents suspecting that they were growing marijuana in the basement, as the house constantly smelled like weed all throughout. My parents did end up finding a plant being grown in the closet under a lamp and evicted them immediately. Marijuana wasn't legal at the time. A few years went by until a family member who works in corrections came over one day. They began talking to my mom about our former tenants and asked if we ever knew where they ended up, and she said that she didn't. The family member then told us that a man was brought into the facility that they worked at who looked and sounded familiar, but they weren't able to place him. They suspected that the man may be our ex-tenant, who is actually being held on charges of SA and murder, but they weren't sure if it was him or not. Eventually, my mom was able to confirm the identity of the man as being our ex-tenant. He was arrested for R-wording and murdering his ex-girlfriend with his father. My parents didn't tell us until years later, but it was pretty wild news considering how many times he invited my siblings and I, without hesitation, into the basement, whenever we were out playing in the yard. I'm a 28-year-old man. The following happened a couple years back, when the city of the apartment that I'm currently renting with my brother was more gang-ridden. Fortunately, a lot of those people moved out at the end of last year, so things are safer now. However, at the time where I lived, it was rather dangerous. and the following shows that. It was February 2020, and the rent was due by the 5th. So, before the deadline, my brother and I went and withdrew the money for the rent. Then, shortly after we came home, I left my apartment and I went down to the rental office to pay, got the receipt, etc. As I was leaving and heading back to my apartment, though, is when the encounter all began. As I was heading back, I looked across the street, and I saw a tall, skinny man with his pants somewhat hanging below his waist across the street, going for a walk up ahead. I merely glanced at him, sort of like how people can merely glance at someone when they're going for a walk, and they see someone across the street. However, as soon as the guy noticed me glance, he started screaming at me viciously. "Hey, ain't nobody talking to you. Ain't nobody thinking about you, man." I was pretty taken aback and kind of shocked. However, not wanting to give him attention, I pretended like I didn't hear him, and I continued walking, not looking in his direction. However, as I continued walking back to my apartment, he started screaming profanities and more at me. Then he started to cross the street to where I was going. However, because he was ahead of me, on the opposite street, when we decided to cross, instead of heading directly towards me, he did the following. He decided to cross the street and sat on some outside apartment steps up ahead to where I was going. The reason was so that I would have to cross his path if I were to get to the front of my apartment. He just sat there, waiting for me to pass him as I was walking. He was dead silent, but you could tell that he could lash out at any second, which gave me chills. My heart was pounding in my chest, and thoughts started running through my head. What if he had a weapon? Would he try and jump me when I passed by him? Would he follow me back to my apartment? With my thoughts racing, I quickly remembered the back entrance. So I went around to the back of the apartment and took the entrance there, which led me to my place. I told my brother what happened, and we immediately agreed that the police should be called, so that's what was done. The police were called, and it took about 7 minutes for them to get there. Shortly into waiting for the police to arrive, I looked out the window of my top floor, and there the guy was. He was walking about the area with a suspicious look on his face, quickly looking back every now and then to see if someone was watching him. Eventually, the police arrived. I told them what happened, gave them a description of the guy, etc. The police also agreed to do a quick sweep of the area. However, the man was nowhere to be found, though they said that they would keep an eye out, even though nothing came up again. Who that man was, I do not know. He may have been on drugs, doing illegal activity which caused him to become very paranoid, etc. Who knows? As for me, all I know is if my apartment did not have a back entrance, things could have ended really badly. This happened a few years ago. I was going through a difficult time, so I was looking for a new place to live without big commitments until I figured life out. I met this guy through a Craigslist posting. He said he had an apartment and was looking for a roommate. I got his name and number, called him, set up a meeting at a public place for a meet and greet. Everything went seemingly fine, and he agreed to show me the place. He seemed super nice and helpful. He was easy to get along with, was neat and low maintenance. It didn't bother me that he was a guy. We agreed on no drugs, no partiness, no craziness terms. We agreed on monthly payments, and I moved in a few weeks later. So it was after 2 weeks. One day he comes in early from work, has this very upset voice and claims that we need to talk. He says that I've been acting very inappropriately by having my boyfriend stop by on occasion. Not even stay or spend the night or anything like that. To see me for like 10 minutes every now and then. I began questioning him, and he just said that made him feel uncomfortable because everyone at the apartment complex thought that I was his romantic partner. I was so furious and couldn't believe this. It then escalated to a point that he said that the entire time he had known me which is like for 2 weeks of very minimal interaction, plus the fact that I worked night shift, so he was by himself most of the time when he was home. He was convinced that, "I believe you are possessed. I can see it in your eyes." I knew at this point that this stuff had totally hit the fan, and that I needed to get as far away from this guy as I could. He acted all calm then, saying that I could take my time looking for a new place, and that our arrangement would not work. Yeah, no duh. So I told my boyfriend what had happened. I found an apartment I could move into, and had planned to do it the very next day. I told the insane roommate. The next day of my moving out comes, and I walk into the apartment to get my stuff. There's this wooden cross above my room's doorframe with this cliché Jesus figure on it, which was pretty offensive since I'm a Christian, and this lunatic had decided that I'm possessed. I walk into my room, and there are these creepy candles all lit. I packed up all of my belongings and left. He sent a message to me later, with of course something that had to do with God and how he was hoping that I would face my sins in darkness. I blocked this creep's number after that. I do trust people a lot less, and would never have a roommate. And this was the first time ever in my life that I had had one. Yeah, for 2 weeks. Every night between 1 to 4 a.m., my downstairs neighbor is doing intense construction, and I only hear it between the hours of 1 to 4 a.m., and it's been going on for like 8+ months, 4 or 5 days a week nonstop, and it's getting louder every night. It keeps me up now, and it never used to. It's much louder than before, which leads me to believe that they're trying to get in, as the sound is consistently getting louder every night. I am immune at risk, so I've been pretty isolated up here by myself, and I'm worried to talk to my downstairs neighbor personally, which also has to do with living in a very sketchy area. Are there any reasons at all why someone would only choose to use their electric tool collection between 1 to 4 a.m., or do I have the right to be worried? I've been constantly telling myself that it's probably nothing for a long time, but it gets scarier every night, and the more I think about it, the more my reasoning feels like excuses. If anybody has an explanation for this, it could put my mind at ease and let me sleep. Thank you. I'm a 21-year-old male, and my girlfriend is a 20-year-old female, and we rented an apartment for a month. The area was secluded, and after dark, everyone would mind their own business. Neighbors would hardly talk to each other or even be outside in the evening. Our apartment was in a building with 4 floors, and each floor had a single apartment. All the apartments were very compact and built to be rented to students. The night we moved in, our taps ran out of water, so I went upstairs hoping to borrow some from the people living upstairs. I realized that 2 out of the 4 apartments were vacant and locked. The apartment on the 4th floor was lit from the inside, so I decided to ring the bell, but to my disappointment, nobody answered. Over the next week, we used to hear the sound of someone whacking a rod or some sort of metal on maybe the floor or some other object. This would start late at night, after 1:30 a.m., and continue for hours. Initially, we didn't care about it, but after some time, it got us intrigued. The sound was clearly from one of the apartments above us, but as I already mentioned, 2 of the 3 were vacant for sure, and the 3rd one seemed vacant, but was lit from inside. I knocked on its door many times, but no one answered. The whacking sound was a daily occurrence, and on some very late nights, we could hear someone climbing the building stairs. It seemed as if we were the only ones living in this building, especially during the day, and until the very late nights. We made up theories to convince ourselves that it was nothing, but the pattern of whacking was too irregular for it to be made by wind or something other than a person. It would start almost daily at around the same time. We asked people around, but didn't get any satisfactory answer. No one knew if anyone lived there. Towards the end of our stay, I saw a shady-looking man going upstairs one day, during the day. I asked him if he was the owner of the apartments upstairs. He said he was, also including the one on the 4th floor. I asked him if anyone lived upstairs, and also about the whacking sound. He told me that no one did, and that he's looking for tenants. He said that he had no idea about the sound. To my surprise, he then asked me, "So, for how long you're going to stay here?" "4 more days till we leave on the 30th of this month," I replied. He asked me if anyone else had rented the place for the next month, and I told him that I didn't know. So the strangest part is that for the next 4 days, there was neither the whacking sound nor the sound of someone climbing up the stairs late at night. However, my girlfriend's internship got extended by 2 days, and we decided to stay there. And just as I had anticipated, the whacking sound resumed after the 30th, the day that we were supposed to leave. I don't know what it was. I won't ever know. But I'm just happy that we got out of the place without any consequences. It really scared me sometimes,